"Tell me his name," said the Mafia boss. By dawn, the streets were silent with fear. His voice tore through the narrow street like a blade. "Tell me his name," he barked, pinning the trembling woman against the cold brick wall. Her breath hitched, her white shirt clinging to her as fear painted her face pale beneath the flickering streetlight. The man's blue shirt stretched over his broad chest as his tattooed hand tightened its grip on her collar. He was fury in flesh, a storm barely restrained. The sound of distant traffic was swallowed by the heavy silence between them. "Tell me his name," he repeated, lower this time, dangerous, his words coated with quiet rage that could freeze blood. She couldn't answer. Her lips quivered, but her throat had locked itself shut. "Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because what's coming next will make your heart pound harder than this alley confrontation. Stay till the end. This one's about to get wild." Her eyes darted, searching for an escape that didn't exist. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek, his gaze burning straight through her soul. His men waited a few feet away, shadows with guns, their expressions unreadable. She whispered something that made his jaw clench, too soft to hear clearly, but enough to send his pulse surging. He slammed his palm against the wall beside her head, making her flinch, and in that moment his anger wavered. He saw a pain, not guilt, the kind of pain that doesn't come from betrayal, but from being broken too many times. His grip loosened. Her tears caught the light, trembling down her face like the truth she couldn't speak. He turned away for a second, rubbing his jaw, his mind flashing between rage and confusion. This woman, this fragile waitress who barely looked him in the eye at the restaurant earlier, had seen something she shouldn't have. His name was Lorenzo Moretti, the kind of man whose voice alone could empty a street. But right now, something about her silence bothered him more than any gun pointed his way. She wasn't lying. She was protecting someone, and that made him furious. She tried to move, but he blocked her path, his shadow swallowing her whole. He wasn't used to hesitation. He gave orders, and people obeyed or vanished. But this trembling woman with bruised knuckles and haunted eyes, she defied him without words. He leaned in again, his voice a whisper laced with menace. "You got one chance. One name. Don't make me repeat myself." Her voice cracked when it finally came out. "I can't." It was barely audible, but it shattered something inside him. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her forward. The scent of rain and gasoline filled the air as he dragged her toward the waiting car. She stumbled, shoes scraping the wet pavement, trying to speak but choking on fear. One of his men opened the door. She didn't resist, just sat there trembling, staring out the window as the city lights blurred by. Inside the car, the air was thick with tension. Lorenzo's right-hand man, Marco, gave him a look in the rearview mirror. The boss ignored it, eyes locked on the woman beside him. She held her arm close, rubbing where his grip had left marks. Her chest rose and fell fast. He noticed every detail, the small cut on her lip, the faint bruise on her jaw. Someone had hurt her before tonight. Someone who wasn't him. He cursed under his breath, his anger shifting direction. He'd assumed she was hiding information, but maybe she was hiding from someone. When the car stopped outside a dim warehouse by the docks, he ordered everyone out except her. The doors slammed shut behind them, leaving them alone in the quiet. The smell of sea salt drifted in as he paced in front of her. "You think I'm your enemy, don't you?" he said, tone heavy, not loud. Her eyes widened, but she said nothing. He walked closer, stopping inches from her face. She didn't flinch this time. That silence again, it was killing him. He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look up. Her pupils dilated, and in that instant he saw it, the flicker of defiance. She wasn't just scared. She was protecting something sacred. The door creaked open. Marco stepped in, phone in hand. "Boss, we found something." A name popped up in the message, Rico Valdez. The second Lorenzo saw it, his veins turned to fire. Rico, the man who betrayed his family 2 years ago, the one who vanished after stealing from him and putting 2 of his men in the ground. He looked at her. The name hit her like a bullet. Her breath stopped, her shoulders tensed. That was it. He knew now. She wasn't random. She was connected to Rico. Maybe his girlfriend. Maybe his sister. Maybe worse. Lorenzo's tone dropped to ice. So that's what this is about. You're protecting him. Her silence confirmed it. He turned away, running a hand over his face, his mind spinning. Rage wanted to explode, but another emotion was clawing its way through. Curiosity, even guilt. Because deep down he knew what came next. He'd have to make her talk, no matter what it took. He walked back, close enough for her to feel the heat from his body. You have no idea who you're protecting, he said quietly. That man's the reason I have blood on my hands. She tried to speak, but he cut her off, slamming his fist into the wall beside her. Tell me his name. He roared again, the echo bouncing through the empty warehouse. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered the name he already knew, and he froze. Rico Valdez. The words hung in the air like a confession. Lorenzo stepped back, chest heaving, eyes flickering with something dark. He'd found his answer, but it didn't feel like victory. The woman before him wasn't an enemy. She was collateral in someone else's game. And suddenly, for the first time in years, Lorenzo didn't know what to do. He stared at her trembling form, realizing he might have just crossed a line he couldn't step back from. The night outside grew colder. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. He turned to Marco. Get the car. We're not done yet. The woman's heart pounded as the engine roared to life again. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't mercy. But she saw something in his eyes when he looked back at her. Something human. Something conflicted. And that terrified her more than his anger ever could. Because monsters who doubt themselves are far more dangerous than those who don't. By dawn, blood would spill. But not for the reasons anyone expected. The car screeched to a stop at the end of the docks, gravel crunching beneath the tires as the headlights cut through the mist. The woman flinched when the door opened, her pulse hammering so loud it felt like the world could hear it. Lorenzo stepped out first, his expression unreadable, his movements sharp, controlled, terrifyingly calm. The silence between them burned hotter than any scream. She didn't dare move until he looked back at her with that look, a mixture of rage and something she couldn't name. Get out, his voice low, no emotion, just command. She obeyed, every step heavy with dread. The wind carried the scent of salt and oil, the sea slapping gently against the rusted edges of the dock, mocking the chaos swirling between them. Lorenzo's men waited in the shadows, watching. Marco leaned on the car, lighting a cigarette, eyes never leaving the woman. She stood there, arms wrapped around herself, trembling but defiant. Lorenzo stepped closer, stopping inches away, his voice a dangerous whisper. You told me his name, but you didn't tell me why. Why protect a man like that? She didn't answer. Her silence hit harder than any curse. Lorenzo's patience snapped. He grabbed her by the arm again, pulling her closer until her breath hit his chest. You think you know him? You think he's innocent? You have no idea what that bastard did. He killed my brother. The words came out sharp, raw, torn from somewhere deep he didn't want touched. His jaw clenched, his eyes burned, and she froze. He hadn't meant to say it, but it was too late. The truth was out, and it hung between them like smoke. Her heart twisted, guilt flickering in her eyes, but still she didn't speak. That silence, it infuriated him. He turned away, pacing, running both hands through his hair, trying to cage the storm inside. He'd spent years burying that pain, turning it into power. But one night, one woman, and it all came rushing back. She reminded him of something he thought he'd lost, the ache of being human. And that made him hate her even more. Marco flicked his cigarette into the sea. Boss, what's the play? He asked. Lorenzo didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed fixed on her, studying the trembling in her fingers, the bruise on her jaw. She looked fragile, but something in her eyes said otherwise. She wasn't just scared. She was surviving. Finally, he said, quietly, but with finality, take her to the safe house. Marco frowned, confusion flashing across his face. Boss, what? Lorenzo's glare cut him off instantly. Do what I said. The woman's breath hitched as Marco grabbed her arm, leading her to the car again. Safe house. The word didn't sound safe. It sounded like a trap. She looked back once, meeting Lorenzo's eyes through the mist. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched as she disappeared into the back seat. He stood there long after the car was gone, the night pressing in around him, his chest tight with something he refused to name. When he finally drove back to his mansion, the city was quiet, the kind of quiet that always came before chaos. His phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. 2 words that made his blood run cold. You're next. He stared at the screen, jaw tightening. Rico. It had to be him. That ghost from his past was back, and somehow, that woman, Lena, Marco had said her name, was tangled right in the middle of it. At the safe house, Lena sat in a small room, wrists free but heart trapped. She didn't know why she was still alive. Maybe he needed her as bait. Maybe he wanted her to lead him to Rico. But part of her, God help her, felt something else. The way he'd looked at her before they left, like he saw something more than fear. Something familiar. Hours passed. Then the door opened, and Lorenzo walked in. The room seemed smaller when he stepped inside, his presence filling it entirely. She stood, instinctively backing away. He raised his hands slightly, not in peace but in control. You're not my prisoner, he said quietly. But if you lie again, I'll make you wish you were. Her throat tightened. I'm not lying, she said, voice trembling. He took a slow step forward. You know where he is. Tell me. She shook her head. No, I don't. He grabbed a chair, flipped it around, and sat, elbows on his knees, staring at her. His silence was louder than his voice. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, she cracked, tears pooling in her eyes. He's my brother, she whispered. The words hit him like a punch. Rico's sister. The air turned sharp. Lorenzo's fists clenched. For a second, he couldn't move. He had spent years hunting the man who ruined him, and now he was looking at the one person who might stop him from finishing it. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, trying to think. His mind told him to end it, to use her, find Rico, settle the score. But something in her eyes made it harder than it should have been. He stood abruptly, walking to the window. The city lights glimmered in the distance, cold and indifferent. When he spoke again, his tone had softened, but only slightly. Your brother killed my blood, he said. She looked at him, tears falling freely now. And your world killed my mother, she fired back, her voice breaking but fierce. That made him stop. The weight of her words landed like a blow. He turned, eyes narrowing. What did you say? Her lips trembled, but she didn't back down. Your men, years ago. A deal gone wrong. You call it business. I call it murder. His chest tightened. Memories flickered. Faces, gunfire, the smell of blood. Maybe it was true. Maybe his empire had taken more than he ever knew. Lorenzo's heart was a storm now. Rage, guilt, something dangerously close to empathy. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. You think you understand this world? You don't. It chews you up, spits you out, and leaves nothing but ghosts. She met his gaze, unflinching. Maybe I'm already a ghost. That broke something in him. The mask he'd worn for years cracked. For the first time, he saw her not as leverage, not as an obstacle, but as someone just as ruined as him. He didn't say another word. He just turned and left, slamming the door behind him, the sound echoing down the hallway. Outside, Marco waited. Boss. Lorenzo lit a cigarette, the flame trembling slightly in his hand. She's his sister, he said finally. Marco's eyes widened. Then she's our key. Lorenzo didn't answer, just stared out into the night. The cigarette burned down to the filter before he tossed it away. His voice came out low, dangerous. Get everyone ready. By dawn, I want Rico Valdez found. Inside, Lena sank to her knees, clutching her chest as tears soaked her face. She had no idea what was coming, but she knew this. Something had changed in his eyes tonight. And that scared her even more than the threat of death. Because somewhere beneath that fury and power, she'd seen it. Pain that matched her own. And that connection, fragile and forbidden, would decide everything when dawn came. The night stretched long, sleepless, thick with tension that clung to every breath. Lorenzo didn't close his eyes once. He sat in his office, hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the maps spread across the desk. The red marks, the pins, the routes, all leading to one name. Rico Valdez. A ghost who had disappeared 3 years ago and now dared to crawl back into the light. His jaw tightened as he replayed the woman's words in his head, her voice shaking but fierce, her eyes burning with defiance. Your men kill my mother. Every time that sentence echoed, something twisted inside him, something he couldn't afford to feel. Downstairs, Lena sat on the small couch, her head buried in her hands. Her wrists still bore faint red marks from where Lorenzo's men had held her too tight. But that wasn't what hurt. What hurt was the memory of her brother's voice, promising her safety, promising her that he'd get them out of this life. Lies. Everything had been lies. Now she was trapped in the home of the man sworn to destroy him. And she couldn't even hate him the way she wanted to, not after seeing the pain behind his rage. The door creaked. Marco stepped in, holding a tray with food. He didn't speak much, just placed it down in front of her, but his eyes lingered a moment too long. There was pity there, maybe curiosity. Lena ignored it. She didn't eat. She couldn't. Her stomach was tight with fear and exhaustion. When Marco turned to leave, she finally whispered, almost too soft to hear, "Is he always like this?" Marco paused, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "Only when he's breathing." Then he was gone. Upstairs, Lorenzo's phone rang once, an encrypted call. He answered without hesitation. A gravelly voice on the other end said, "We found movement near the East Docks. A shipment under Rico's name. Could be bait." Lorenzo's response was cold and immediate. "I don't care if it's bait. We bite." His mind was already made up. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. He moved fast, slipping his gun into the holster, sliding his coat on. But before he could leave, he stopped by the door that separated him from Lena. Something made him hesitate, just for a second. Then he opened it. She looked up at him, startled, eyes wide, body tense. He stepped closer, the low light cutting sharp lines across his face. "I'm giving you one chance. Tell me where he is, and you walk out alive." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. Lorenzo's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice low, dangerous. She met his eyes, defiant even through her fear. "Maybe I'm done running from mistakes." He didn't respond. He just turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The sound of engines roared outside moments later. The convoy moved through the city like a pack of wolves. Black SUVs cutting through empty streets, headlights slicing through fog. Lorenzo sat in the front seat, eyes forward, every muscle tense. Marco glanced at him from the passenger side. "You sure you want to do this yourself, boss?" Lorenzo didn't look at him. "Rico took something from me. I'll take it back with my own hands." Back at the safe house, Lena couldn't sit still. Her heart thudded in her chest like a warning. She felt something bad was coming, something worse than death. Without thinking, she slipped to the window, testing the latch. It was loose. Maybe too easy. A trap? Or maybe he'd left it that way on purpose. She didn't care. She needed to move. She climbed out, landing softly on the damp ground. Her breath fogged in the cold night air as she started running. Across the city, gunfire cracked. The docks exploded into chaos. Lorenzo's men poured out of the SUVs, taking cover behind crates and vehicles. Bullets whistled through the air. Lorenzo moved like a storm, fearless, his gun steady, his focus razor-sharp. He wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore. He was fighting to bury the ghosts that haunted him. Every shot felt personal. Every scream, another echo from his past. Then he saw him. Rico Valdez. Older, colder, but unmistakable. Standing by a shipping container, smirking, gun raised. "So, the king leaves his castle," Rico shouted, his voice mocking even through the chaos. Lorenzo fired without hesitation, the bullet grazing Rico's arm. Rico ducked behind cover, laughing like a man who had nothing left to lose. "You should have stayed hidden," Lorenzo growled under his breath. He pushed forward, ignoring Marco's shouts to fall back. He wanted Rico's face in front of him. He wanted to look him in the eyes when it ended. But Rico was smart. Every move felt like a setup. The gunfire stopped for half a second, too quiet. Lorenzo's instinct screamed. He dove to the side, just as the container exploded, flames lighting up the night. The blast threw him to the ground, ears ringing, lungs burning. Rico's laughter echoed through the smoke. You think you own this city, Lorenzo? You're just another ghost waiting for a grave. Then he was gone, disappearing into the fire and chaos like a phantom. Lorenzo staggered to his feet, coughing, blood dripping from a cut above his brow. Marco rushed over, shouting over the noise. Boss, we have to move. This whole place is wired. Lorenzo's gaze burned through the smoke. Find him. I don't care how long it takes. They barely made it out before the second explosion lit the sky. By the time the flames died down, half the docks were gone. Enrico was still alive. Hours later, as dawn crept over the horizon, Lorenzo returned to the mansion, exhausted, furious, and bleeding. But the moment he stepped inside, something fell off. The guards were gone. The air was too still. He drew his gun and moved quietly through the hall. Then he saw the open window in the safe house room. Empty. His heart dropped like a stone. She was gone. Marco came running in behind him. Boss, Lena's missing. Lorenzo slammed his fist into the wall, rage boiling over. He didn't know why it burned so bad. She was just leverage, just a pawn. But the thought of her out there, alone, scared, possibly heading straight into Rico's hands, made something twist deep inside him. He grabbed his phone, dialing one of his men. Track her. Use every camera in this city if you have to. Out on the edge of town, Lena stumbled through the back streets, her legs weak, her lungs on fire. She didn't have a plan, just a direction, away. But fate had other plans. A car slowed beside her, tinted windows rolling down just enough for a voice to call her name. Lena. She froze. The door opened. Rico stepped out, a smile curling across his lips. Little sister. Her world spun. He was alive. For a moment, relief flooded through her, but it vanished just as quickly when she saw the blood on his hands, the darkness in his eyes. He pulled her close, his embrace tight, almost possessive. I told you I'd come for you, he whispered. She tried to speak, to ask him what he'd done, but his tone shifted, colder. You've been with him, haven't you? Lorenzo. She shook her head, but it didn't matter. Rico's smile disappeared. You don't understand, Lena. That man is poison. He killed everything we ever had. His words dripped with hate. He looked at her like she was his only salvation and his greatest betrayal. Meanwhile, Lorenzo's car tore through the streets, his mind racing. Every instinct screamed that he was running out of time. And when his phone buzzed, Marco's voice on the other end confirmed it. We found her. He sighed. With Rico. Lorenzo's grip tightened on the wheel until his knuckles turned white. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes said it all. The hunt wasn't over. It had just become personal. By the time the sun broke over the rooftops, painting the city in pale gold, two men were moving toward the same place. One to save, one to destroy. And caught between them, Lena stood trembling, torn between blood and the beast who'd stolen her heart without ever meaning to. Lena's heartbeat was chaos. The city hadn't slept, and neither had she. Dawn cracked open over the rooftops, lighting a battlefield no one had prepared for. The air smelled like gasoline and gunpowder, like endings. Rico's hand was still gripping her arm too tightly, his eyes wild with the kind of madness that only comes from betrayal. Across the lot, Lorenzo stepped out of his car, his black coat catching the morning wind. The silence between them was louder than the explosions from the night before. Rico's laughter broke at first, low, bitter, dangerous. You came alone? How noble. How stupid. Lorenzo didn't answer. His gun was already raised. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream for them to stop, but she knew it was pointless. These men weren't talking anymore. They were measuring which one of them would still be standing by the time the sun fully rose. Rico pushed her behind him, using her as a shield without hesitation. Lorenzo's voice cut through the tension, cold and sharp as a blade. Let her go, Rico. She's got nothing to do with this. Rico sneered, his grip on her tightening. She's got everything to do with this. You took everything from me, Lorenzo, my crew, my money, my city, my family. Lorenzo's eyes darkened. Your family died because of you. Don't pretend it was anyone else's fault. Rico's finger twitched near his trigger. Lies. You think I don't know what you did? You pulled the strings that burned my mother alive. You started this war. Lorenzo took a slow step forward, gun still steady. She was a casualty of your greed. I warned you to walk away. You didn't listen. The two men stood frozen, every breath heavy, every muscle ready. Lena couldn't take it anymore. She shoved Rico's arm away and ran forward, standing between them. Stop it, both of you. Her voice cracked, but carried. If either of you pull that trigger, there's no going back. Lorenzo's eyes flickered. Something human, something he'd buried. Rico's didn't. He raised the gun anyway, the barrel pointing at Lorenzo's heart. The shot rang out before anyone could think. But it wasn't Lorenzo who fell. Rico's eyes went wide, his mouth open in shock. A red bloom spread across his shirt. He stumbled, looking down at his own sister, the gun still shaking in her trembling hands. She dropped it immediately, tears streaming down her face. Rico collapsed to his knees, blood painting the concrete beneath him. His last breath came out as a whisper, something between love and disbelief. You shot me. She was sobbing, words breaking apart in the air. I begged you to stop. Lorenzo didn't move for a moment. He just stared, the gun still in his hand but forgotten. When he finally did step forward, it wasn't with anger. It was with the weight of everything that had brought them to this point. He crouched beside Rico's body, closing the man's eyes with a heavy sigh. Then he turned to Lena. She was shaking, pale, broken. He reached for her, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. They stood there for a long time, surrounded by silence and sirens. The war that had consumed both their lives had burned itself out in one final, tragic act. But there was no victory here, only survival. Hours later, the police arrived. Lorenzo didn't run. He didn't fight. He gave them everything: names, accounts, routes. The empire he'd built with blood and violence, he tore down himself. When they asked why, he simply said, because it ends with me. Lena watched from a distance as they took him away. She should have felt relief, maybe even revenge. But all she felt was an ache too deep to name. Days passed, then weeks. She tried to live again, quietly, simply. She found work in a small cafe outside the city, her life stripped down to peace and routine. But some nights, when the wind rattled the windows, she swore she could still hear his voice, the way he'd said her name in that final moment before they took him. Months later, word spread that the city was finally clean. The old families were gone. The fear that used to run through every dark alley had vanished. People said it was Lorenzo's doing, that he dismantled everything before turning himself in. Some called him a traitor. Others called him a savior. Lena didn't call him anything. She just sat at her window and watched the streets he'd once ruled, now silent. Then one evening, a black envelope appeared at her door. No name, no address. Inside was a single note, handwritten in the same rough scrawl she'd recognize anywhere. You deserve better than ghosts. Live. She pressed the note to her chest, tears welling again. But this time, they weren't from pain. They were from the strange, impossible feeling of hope. Lorenzo's name disappeared from the news. Some said he was transferred to a high-security prison overseas. Others claimed he died behind bars. But those who knew him, the few who'd lived long enough to remember what kind of man he truly was, whispered something else. That the Mafia boss had walked away from it all, leaving the world to believe he was gone, watching quietly from the shadows as the city rebuilt itself. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the cafe lights flickered at closing time, Lena could swear she saw a figure across the street. Tall, still, half in shadow, watching her with that same calm intensity she could never forget. But when she blinked, he was gone, like smoke on the wind. The streets were quiet now. The city had peace. And the woman who once stood in the middle of a war had found her way back to herself. Because sometimes love doesn't end in forever. It ends in forgiveness. And in the silence left behind, both found what they'd lost in blood and fire: freedom. When the Mafia boss demanded a name, he found redemption instead. She lost everything, but gained her life back. Justice came not through vengeance, but through choice. In the city once ruled by fear, peace was bought with pain, and the echoes of their stories still haunt every quiet dawn. Subscribe now for more shocking Mafia love stories. Comment where you're watching from, share this fire tale, and stay tuned. The next story will blow your mind.